A bronze sword bends in half mid-battle. The warrior drops to one knee, puts the blade under his boot, and physically straightens it while enemies close in. This happened repeatedly for over 1,000 years, and it reveals the first truth about sword breaking points. The way blades fail determines how men fight. Today we're destroying every major sword type to find out what actually kills them. Some break in ways that make no sense. Others survive forces that should be impossible. And the world's most famous sword hides a fatal flaw in its perfect edge. Bronze, the blade that won't die. Strike a bronze sword against a shield rim with full force. The blade folds over like tin foil. Not a crack, not a chip, a complete fold. This is 1,000 newtons of impact, roughly 225 pounds of force, a strong overhead cut, and the bronze sword just bends into a useless curve. Greek sources describe warriors stopping mid-fight to straighten their swords. Roman accounts mention the same problem. This wasn't rare. This was normal. Bronze doesn't snap. It surrenders. The metal is 90% copper, 10% tin, soft compared to steel. When you hit it hard enough, around 800 to 1,200 newtons, the crystalline structure deforms permanently. The sword becomes a bent piece of expensive metal. But here's what makes this worse. Hit two bronze swords edge to edge, and both edges crush. The impact deforms the softer metal on both blades. One parry ruins two weapons. This is why Bronze Age warriors never blocked with their swords. Their shields did all the defensive work. The sword only attacked. The material weakness forced the entire tactical system. Your weapon couldn't survive the fight you wanted to have. Early iron, the downgrade. Everyone thinks iron replaced bronze because it was better. Watch what actually happens. An early iron sword takes the same 1,000 newton impact. The blade doesn't fold smoothly like bronze. It develops a crack, a hairline fracture at a slag inclusion, an impurity trapped in the metal during smelting. Apply more stress and that crack spreads. Suddenly the blade snaps in half. Iron won because tin disappeared when Bronze Age trade collapsed around 1200 BCE, not because iron was superior. Early bloomery iron was actually worse. Same tensile strength as bronze, around 200 to 300 megapascals. But it failed catastrophically instead of just bending. Bronze you could fix, iron you buried. Breaking point, 900 to 1,300 newtons. But the real problem was unpredictability. You never knew where the weak point was until the blade snapped. Warriors carried backup weapons because their primary sword might break without warning. For over 1,000 years, from 1200 BCE to around 200 CE, soldiers fought with weapons inferior to what their ancestors used. That's not progress. That's survival after collapse. Pattern welding, the first sword that survives. A pattern-welded blade takes a 1,500 newton impact. That's 340 pounds of force. A cavalry strike. The blade flexes 20 degrees, then springs back straight. No crack, no bend, no failure. This is the first real improvement in sword technology in over a millennium. Pattern welding forge welds strips of iron and steel together, creating a layered structure. When a crack tries to form, it hits a boundary between layers and stops. The crack can't propagate through the entire blade. Viking swords use this technique. The sagas describe swords bending in battle but rarely breaking. The metallurgy proves the story's true. Breaking point jumps to 1,500 to 2,000 newtons. For the first time, warriors could trust their weapons to survive a real fight. But this was still just Europe catching up to what the East had already perfected. Crucible steel, the weapon Europe couldn't match. A Woot steel blade from India takes a 2,200 newton impact. That's nearly 500 pounds of force. The kind of blow that would shatter pattern-welded iron. The blade flexes 28 degrees and returns to perfect straightness. Crucible steel is homogeneous. No layers, no slag, no weak points. Just pure high-carbon steel with tensile strength up to 1,000 megapascals. That's more than triple early iron. Persian shamshers and Indian talwars made from this steel could survive impacts that destroyed European blades. When Crusaders first encountered these weapons, they couldn't explain how Eastern swords cut through their own without damage. The answer was metallurgy Europe wouldn't match for centuries. Breaking point, 2,000 to 2,500 newtons. Historical accounts describe these blades bending into extreme curves and springing back. That's not legend. That's what happens when your steel is that good. One culture took this knowledge even further and created a sword with a hidden weakness nobody talks about. The katana. Perfection that destroys itself. A katana edge hits another hard surface at 900 newtons. Not even a particularly hard strike. The edge doesn't bend. It chips. A small fracture appears in the cutting edge. Hit it again, and another chip forms. The edge that can slice through bone like water is destroying itself with every improper impact. This is the fatal flaw hidden in the katana's perfection. Differential hardening creates an edge at 60 Rockwell hardness. That's harder than a file, hard enough to hold an edge that can cut through almost anything. But hardness means brittleness. The spine stays soft at 40 Rockwell, giving the blade flexibility. The sword can flex 15 to 20 degrees. Breaking point is around 1,800 to 2,200 newtons. The blade itself won't snap, but the edge will fail long before that, at just 800 to 1,000 newtons of improper impact. This is why Japanese swordsmanship obsessively avoids edge-to-edge contact. It's not philosophy or honor. It's metallurgical necessity. One wrong parry, and you've permanently damaged your weapon. The katana is optimized for cutting perfection against unarmored targets. Use it that way, and it's devastating. Use it like a European sword, blocking and binding, and it destroys itself. The greatest strength creates the greatest vulnerability. If everything you thought you knew about swords is collapsing, hit subscribe. The European longsword, built to survive. What kills other blades? A European longsword takes a 2,400 Newton impact edge to edge against another sword. That's 540 pounds of force, the kind of blow that would chip a katana's edge to pieces. The longsword edge deforms slightly. A small nick appears. The sword keeps working. Hit it again. Another nick. The sword still functions. Bind an opponent's blade and wrench sideways, applying complex lateral stress. The longsword handles it. Grip the blade with your bare hand and use it as a lever in half sorting. The blade doesn't snap. This is what European armored combat required. Not cutting perfection. Survival under abuse. The edge is hardened to 50 to 55 Rockwell, softer than a katana. But the entire blade is optimized for durability under every kind of stress. Medium carbon steel, 0.5 to 0.7% carbon. Differential hardening with a softer core. The result is a weapon that flexes 20 to 30 degrees before permanent damage. Breaking point, 2,000 to 2,800 newtons. High-quality blades from master smiths could exceed 3,000 newtons. That's over 670 pounds of force. Archaeological finds show longswords with decades of combat wear. Edge damage, yes. Scratches and nicks, absolutely. But catastrophic breaks are extremely rare. These weren't art pieces displayed in castles. They were tools that had to work when a knight's life depended on it. The katana was built for cutting perfection in unarmored duels. The longsword was built to survive armored war. Different problems, different solutions. Both brilliant for their context. Rapier. Weakness as strategy. A rapier takes lateral force perpendicular to the flat of the blade, just 900 newtons. The blade bends 35 degrees. This looks like failure. It's actually genius. The rapier springs back to perfect straightness instantly. The flexibility isn't a flaw. It's the entire design. The blade needs to bend around parries and return to line for the next thrust. Breaking point under lateral stress is only 800 to 1,200 newtons. That's similar to bronze. But rapier technique never puts the blade under that kind of stress. You don't parry heavy cuts. You don't deliver chopping blows. You control the point, thrust to openings, and let the blade's flexibility work for you. The weapon shaped the fighting style. The fighting style protected the weapon. Historical rapiers show almost no bending damage because they were never used in ways that would cause it. Saber. The only test that matters. A cavalry saber impacts at full gallop. The rider is moving at 25 miles per hour. The swing adds rotational velocity. The combined force exceeds 2,600 newtons. That's over 580 pounds of force concentrated on the edge. The saber cuts deep into the target. The blade flexes 30 degrees from the impact, then springs back. No crack, no permanent bend. Ready for the next charge. This is the ultimate test of sword durability, not laboratory conditions. Not controlled experiments. Real combat where failure means death and there's no second chance. Military sabers used medium to high carbon steel, 0.6 to 0.8% carbon, with edges hardened to 50 to 56 Rockwell. Breaking point, 2,200 to 2,800 newtons. Historical accounts describe sabers surviving entire campaigns. Hundreds of charges, thousands of cuts. The blade kept working because it had to. There was no backup plan. How swords actually die. Swords don't shatter from one dramatic clash. They accumulate damage. Small edge chips, microscopic cracks, work hardening from repeated stress. Eventually, a weak point develops and the blade fails. Improper heat treatment kills more swords than combat ever did. Too hard, and the blade is brittle. Too soft, and it bends. The balance is everything. Metallurgical defects create invisible failures waiting to happen. Slag inclusions, decarburized zones from bad forging, quench cracks from uneven cooling. Under stress, these flaws become catastrophic. And misuse destroys even perfect blades. Edge-to-edge parries with full force when the sword wasn't designed for it, striking objects harder than the blade, using a cutting weapon to pry. Every sword has limits. Exceed them, and physics doesn't care about your reputation. What this actually means: bronze bends at 800 to 1,200 newtons but won't break. Early iron snaps at 900 to 1,300 newtons. Pattern welding survives to 1,500 to 2,000 newtons. Crucible steel reaches 2,500 newtons. Katanas break at 2,200 newtons, but the edge chips at 900. European longswords endure 2,800 newtons of abuse. Rapiers bend at 900 newtons and use it as strategy. Sabers survive 2,600 newtons and keep killing. These aren't just numbers. They're the difference between a weapon that saves your life and one that fails when you need it most. Every sword ever made is a compromise between hardness and flexibility, cutting power and durability, perfection and survival. The best sword isn't the one that's hardest or sharpest. It's the one that still works after everything goes wrong. And understanding that changes everything about what makes a weapon good.